DC released Shazam over the weekend. This was something that I didn't really know too much about. I don't really know anything about the character. I don't know anything about the movie even. It just kind of came out of nowhere. This was during the time where DC started to restructure themselves and make it less of an extended universe as much as it is, let's focus on individual movies rather than trying to make an Avengers knockoff. And they have Shazam. We had Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and they were great. They have their faults, but they also have their positives. They have their moments that make it really stick out from what Marvel's been doing. And now they have Shazam. I think this is the best of all of them. This is a great movie. Zachary Levi knocked it out of the park. Good for him. Wish he would be in more stuff. Wish I would be watching more of his stuff, I guess. It just seemed like he fell off the face of the earth after Chuck and after he was killed off in Thor Ragnarok. Yeah, he was in that movie. I kind of thought, I didn't know what happened to him. He's just sort of disappeared, but now he's in this movie out of nowhere, and he's great. He is amazing. He is an amazing comedic talent, and he brings a lot of levity to this movie. But that's the thing, the movie doesn't just rely on levity. It's not trying to have the same kind of humor packed into it that a Marvel movie does. In fact, a lot of the times the movie isn't even trying to be funny. It's just being a fun kids fantasy movie. And it's a kids fantasy movie that will work for kids. I'm sure the idea of being a kid and turning into a superhero is amazing, but also it works for adults. I really had a lot of fun during this movie. It has a great cast. It has a great setup. It has a great hero. And it has a lot of emotion to it too. The family dynamics in the movie work excellently. The movie also kind of has that, I don't know, it's about a foster family, and once again, just like Instant Family, I'm like, oh, it makes me want to adopt kids, and maybe the movie's effective, but this is dangerous for me. I can't, it makes me think, oh, I could have something like that. I could have a family. I could do that. No, that's a bad thing that the movie's teaching me. But it's really good at showing those family dynamics, and it's really good at, even though some of the characters are barely in the movie, they all have a distinct personality, and they all really work. The movie, strangely enough, does kind of take a lot of beats from Kick-Ass, the 2010 film. I really enjoy that movie. It's one of my, honestly, favorites of all time. And even to the point where they have Mark Strong as the villain, which it's like, wow, I was really thinking of Kick-Ass. Shazam's trying to make himself popular on YouTube. He's doing less hero work and more just showing off and being in costume. But you know, it does things differently to a point. I really like that it takes the fantasy elements super seriously. It takes this character, this old wizard named Shazam, and he's waiting many years to pass his powers on to someone else, and the movie just goes for it. It's just like how Aquaman did it. It doesn't hold back. It doesn't try to make everything set in the real world. It doesn't try to make everything a joke. It actually deals with it very seriously, and I really dug that. I'm like, this movie is living up to the comic book. There's comedy here and there, but it all knocks it out of the park, and it doesn't do it too much. You also have an excellent opening scene. It is a villain origin story, which is I always like that movies can do that. Very few do it this way, but I really like when movies can pull it off. It takes place in the 70s, and it has a song in it that's a Christmas song. And the movie is also sort of a Christmas movie, which, of course, I'm going to love it then. But it reminded me of Gremlins right away. And I'll tell you what, Gremlins kind of kept coming back to my mind the entire time, where there's some really bright moments, but then there's some really terrifying moments, and guys getting thrown out of a building. There's some creatures in this movie that at first I thought looked pretty generic, but by the end I was really loving them. They seemed one step away from practical. I almost kind of wonder if they used sort of some kind of suit to render the CGI elements against, because it felt, you could tell it was done by a computer, but there was something about the effects done on the creatures in this movie that felt really good. I don't know how to explain it, but it just, at first I didn't like them, but they started to really grow on me. The effects in general in this movie are really good. A lot of them are practical. It's really kind of weird almost to watch something like, Aquaman was a great looking movie, but there was definitely a lot of computer graphics going on in that movie, which is fine. I mean, you had to render Atlantis somehow. But in this movie, especially after watching so many Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, I mean, I just binged them all. Love them, but they use a ton of computer effects. This movie, it was weird to see so many things done practically. Things you wouldn't even think of, like smoke coming out of a door. Nowadays, they would just be like, just film a door and we'll throw the smoke in later. No, this movie actually takes time to throw that in. A lot of sets are real. They go to a real carnival. They go to a real cave. I mean, it's not a real cave, but they actually made an entire cave set. They actually take the time to build sets, and it's really fun to look at. This movie also feels like a response to a lot of the past movies, like Justice League, where we had a bunch of heroes team up to fight against a villain that didn't really work that well. Here, they do the same thing. They have a sudden a bunch of different superheroes in this movie. I was like, whoa, I was not expecting this, but I love it, and it works super well. Like in Man of Steel, when characters were getting thrown around, Superman and Zod, when they were throwing each other around, they were going through buildings, knocking them over. In this movie, it was weird to see Shazam get thrown and not go through a building. I was like, oh, it's cool that the movie decided to change that up and be like, nah, let's leave the catastrophic damage to a minimal because he's still supposed to be a hero to everyone. And I like that he's actually throwing some challenges. Not everything is super, super fast. Taking beats from a martial arts movie. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe does that, where everything can be really quick. You could save people really quick and move on to the next one. In this movie, there's a bus falling, and it takes a lot of time for him to figure out what he's going to do, how he's going to do it. I like that. He's actually working on his skills, and that's really enjoyable to watch. If you're going to do an origin story, if you're going to go for it, I know a lot of people dislike it, but do it right. Actually go with the origin story. Actually have him learn. And he does. Was great. And the movie just has a really good look to it. It has a great score. Some of the music just, it takes you back to some of the stuff they would do for something like Batman or Superman or the original Spider-Man. It's like, this is just classic. It's not like a super memorable theme, but it's really upbeat music, and I'm like, I miss this. Especially since the movie does kind of have a dark tone at times. It can mix the dark elements in there. Even the cinematography kind of has a darker look to it. But they still managed to make the colors pop in a really vibrant way. It's like the colors, they're desaturated, but the contrast is also really lowered. But it's still beautiful to look at. I don't know how they achieved it, because so many DC movies have tried to do this and they failed, but here it's done. This is the best looking of all of them. And the story and the characters, it brings me back to older movies like The Goonies and Gremlins, like I've said already, and older superhero movies, not modern ones. It takes me back to something like they did with the original Superman, with the original Batman. I gotta say, it seems like an 80s movie that finally came to life after all these years. The movie's been trying to be made since the 90s even, so I shouldn't even be too surprised. Maybe a lot of those people stayed on for a long time, and maybe some of the writers took notes from those screenplays, or I don't know. But I love this director. He did Lights Out, and I've never seen the movie, but after seeing this, I'm like, I have to check that out, because this is some great work. This is, in a world where there's so many superhero movies, it's amazing that they can still do something like this that's original. It feels original, even though it takes a lot of notes from a bunch of different movies. This felt fresh. This felt different. This looked different, and it was so enjoyable, and it really made my day.